Expose the insanity. It is destroying our country. The inmates are running the asylum. We are dedicated to demanding that the radical left explain to us how carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, since this contradicts the science we learned in grade school. Considering that we will be spending trillions of dollars on the Green New Deal, the world has a right to know. When we at PS NORAC heard the words, God America, we were shocked and tried to understand how anyone could say this. What we have come to realize is that there has been a psychological warfare leveled at us for decades. Hitler realized that hate was a unifying force and said if they hadn't had the Jews to hate, they would have had to create a Jew. This hatred for America has been building for decades. This insanity demonstrated itself on Coney Island when a school principal became upset when the students were singing Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA. We at PS NORAC have been searching for decades for an explanation how carbon dioxide can physically transfer the needed heat to create global warming. All we have found is garbage created by a group of chuckleheads. In 1998, the Oregon Petition was created and signed by 31,487 scientists saying that the global warming that has been happening for hundreds of years was not man-made. The woke intellectual elites objected and claimed that these individuals did not have enough credibility to be taken seriously. They successfully shut down all debate, refusing to debate, saying that these individuals would only confuse the American people, insisting that the American people are not intelligent enough to decipher for themselves. They attacked the character of these scientists, suggesting they lack the mental ability to understand. It is not surprising that conservatives are being accused of having lizard brains. Questioning people's character is a communist practice that dates back to Karl Marx himself, who was successful in diminishing the character of his opposition. Let's examine for ourselves and see who really has character credibility. By exposing these individuals and creating doubt in the public narrative, we can defeat this threat.
The population bomb, acid rain, the ozone hole, global cooling, you name it. The global warming scare has longer legs because it's got more money.
That also gives climate alarmists a reason to squash dissent.
The climate change deniers suggest there's still a debate over the science. There is not.
I bought what they were saying.
Judith Curry is a climate scientist at Georgia Tech. She once agreed with the scaremongers.
What changed?
Well, ClimateGate.
Emails reveal a plot among the world's top climate scientists.
A group of esteemed scientists were strategizing to squash their opponents. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Why should I believe this instead of my own judgment? What scientists actually agree on is a very narrow slice of things. Yes, temperatures have been increasing overall for the last several hundred years.
No doubt.
And that carbon dioxide does act to warm the planet. But there's no agreement as to whether warming is dangerous or not.
For saying that,
you were one of the targets of the congressman saying, show us where you get your money.
Yeah. I was one of the 7.
7 climate skeptics were branded heretics in order to reveal all their sources of funds. Curry abandoned science.
This is after praising me and pushing me a few years ago as, the prestigious scientist.
Well, you have wrong opinions now.
Yeah. I was trying to be honest as a scientist. It was very unpopular with a lot of my colleagues. They were trying to squash people who disagreed with them.
And they've succeeded.
I get emails from people all the time who wish they could speak out.
What are they worried about?
Losing their jobs?
It's dangerous to dissent when climate change is something politicians address with religious zeal.
And we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
Our planet is going to face disaster if we don't turn this ship around.
And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And this is the war. This is our World War II.
After your movie An Inconvenient Truth came out in 2006, you made the following comments as part of your publicity for the movie. You said, unless we took, quote, drastic measures, the world would reach a point of no return within 10 years, and you called it a true planetary emergency. We're 11 years later. No. Weren't you wrong?
I'm struck researching this, how there's constant media hysteria, and it changes. In 1941, it was reported that World War II caused weather extremes. In 1961, the New York Times said scientists agree the world's becoming colder. Scientists worried about a new ice age. Now we worry about warming. Shouldn't we be skeptical?
When we start going through puberty, our brain literally starts learning how to crosstalk, which means the brain starts to take information that has been previously learned and makes application to what the individual is going through at the present time. As an example, when the brain encounters the statement, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, it uses the knowledge that it has accumulated to understand what is trying to be expressed. It doesn't take long before it realizes that what is being said is referring to the way a greenhouse captures and retains heat and temperature. Then its reasoning turns to carbon dioxide. This takes it back to grade school when in science class the 3 stages of matter were discussed. The brain then recalls Mr. Jordan, the science teacher, explaining that as matter takes on heat, it starts to lose its cohesiveness. Solids turn to liquid and liquids turn to gas. It remembers Mr. Jordan then asking, is there ever time in which matter loses all its cohesiveness? And the answer being yes. Carbon dioxide is a good example of this. Carbon dioxide is a mere trace element, and yet it is evenly distributed throughout the earth. As a result, all vegetation is able to get enough of what is needed to grow. If carbon dioxide had maintained any of its cohesiveness, there wouldn't be much food for us to eat. The brain brings back to mind that Mr. Jordan then turned to the next subject, water, by asking, when does water become a liquid? The class answered 32 degrees. When does it boil? The class answered 212 degrees. Mr. Jordan explained many of the facets and features of water, how water acts as an accumulator, capturing heat in the south. Then the Pacific Ocean currents bring it to the west coast, demonstrating that water acts as a temperature regulator of our planet. Mr. Jordan explained that without this larger range of temperature, water would not be able to do this. With the ability to crosstalk, the brain was able to recall facts and apply them to what the greenhouse gas people were saying. They were talking about an ability similar to water. Coincidentally, Mr. Jordan asked the class if carbon dioxide could act the same as water. The class didn't have an answer. Mr. Jordan proceeded to explain that it can't, as its melting point and its boiling point is 70 degrees below zero. It cannot act on temperature the same way that water does. If it does, how? It is insane to cancel women's athletic competition when male high school athletes are breaking female world records. The Green New Deal is insane. There are 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. 10 parts per million of this is the carbon dioxide created by humanity and industrialization. It is insane to think that this 10 parts per million can warm the rest of the atmosphere's 999,600 parts per million. This would mean that every unit of carbon dioxide would have to collect and distribute 99,960 calories of heat to raise the atmospheric temperature by 1 calorie. Methane has a presence of 1.79 parts per million in our atmosphere. It is also insane to think that this small amount is having a thermal effect. It is insane to think that we have to reduce our consumption of beef because cows are flatulent and give off methane. The domestic cow is a small part of the animals whose flatulence gives off methane. If we were to take these fools seriously, we would immediately start a campaign to destroy all herbivores that share the cow's diet. These animals have existed for thousands of years. What is causing their flatulence to be an imminent threat to the planet now? It is insane and ignorant to think you could use trees to create a record of global warming temperatures when the temperature around a tree is controlled by the weather, being potentially above average or potentially below average for sustained periods of time. To make this type of study, you would have to have millions of trees distributed over the entire surface of the earth. Hey, stupid! Trees don't grow in Antarctica, on the ocean, or in desert areas. This you would need to make a record that would accomplish this objective. George Orwell said, "One has to belong to the intelligentsia to believe things like that." No ordinary man could be such a fool. It is insane to occupy the public narrative with the thought that there is a great moral injustice in the way a sports team would use the name Redskins as a logo, or to stop using gender-specific pronouns to rectify some undefined injustice. This is insane, the way the radical left construct injustices in their imagination with no definition of what they're trying to accomplish. KGB defector Yuri Bezmenov said that this is what the communists want.
This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda wants from Americans, to distract their opinion, attention, and mental energy from real issues of the United States into a non-issues, into a non-world, non-existent harmony. Obviously, it's more beneficial for the Soviet aggressors to have a bunch of duped Americans than Americans who are self-conscious, healthy, physically fit, and alert to the reality.
First of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronoun?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
Quick point of privilege once again. Quick point of privilege once again. Hi, James Jackson, Sacramento DSA, he, him. I have already asked people to be mindful of the chatter of their comrades who are sensitive to sensory overload, and that goes double for the heckling and the hissing. It is also triggering to my anxiety. Like, the be comradely isn't just for, like, you know, let's keep things civil or whatever. It's so that people aren't going to get triggered and so that it doesn't affect their performance as a delegate, okay? Your need to express yourself is important, but your need to express yourself should not trump or over, like...
I see that no one's clapping for me. It could be because I'm not engaging, but it also is because everyone's doing this. And that's really important, because those loud bursts of noise, even though this is a noisy space, when we can do something like reducing that, that's really important. So please don't clap, shoot up these. We have a lot of disabled comrades, and a lot of those are invisible disabilities. You don't know who it is that is having a more difficult time navigating this space, and this space was not created with all of their needs in mind. So it's up to us to modify that space to make sure that everybody is able to move in the ways that they need to move. And additionally, with the noise issue, like avoid hissing, avoid waving banners, right? Because there's all sorts of things. If you don't know what to do, show up these, right? I'm sure there's lots of ways that we can communicate to each other without needing to rely on something that's going to hurt somebody else. We have quiet rooms that are available. There's a range of options of these, right? Please don't go into that space with anything that's like an aggressive scent, for instance, right? Because we don't want to put people in stressful situations that they don't consent to, right? And there are right-wing infiltrators who are trying to get in here, but it's going to be really traumatic for people if we're not making an affirmative effort to de-escalate each other and de-escalate ourselves, right?
In the late 60s and early 70s, the American virtue of carrying a burden with ease was abandoned for the feeling that any burden was unjustified. In addition, that the rest of the world should address itself to any discomfort we feel. Disregarding the truth, the earth is not a perfect place to live. The sun can be too hot, the wind can be too cold. There are discomforts in life. Isn't it saner to be concerned about the individuals who lost their businesses during the left-wing riots? Shouldn't we be concerned about the individuals who advocate defunding the police and be sensitive to the many businesses and lives that have been lost because of this insanity? Murder and crime rates are skyrocketing in these cities. Because of defunding the police, more African Americans are losing their lives. Do Black Lives Matter? Defund the police is unquestionably insane.
That brings us to our big story. Two Portland commissioners want to slash another $18 million from the police budget. And I'm sure you remember at the peak of the protests this summer, the city already chopped the budget by $15 million, and that was a historic amount of money at the time. Now, Maggie Vespa found out what these proposed cuts could cost the Bureau and what our mayoral candidates think about it. I'll give you a hint. One likes it, one doesn't.
Amid months of nightly protests and a historic spike in shootings and violent crimes,
it's kind of scary.
2 city commissioners are pushing to slash millions of dollars from the Portland Police Bureau's budget again.
Of course, a spike in violence in Portland is leading the mayor of that city to request $2 million in police funding after slashing the police budget just last year. Jason Rantz, host of the Jason Rantz Show, is here with more. Jason, great to see you. I'll speak here about what we're seeing in New York City first. New York City saw a 40% increase in murders in 2020. That was despite the fact that we were living through a pandemic and there were a lot of lockdowns, but it came from the change in policy with respect to the police and what we're doing and how we're approaching crime. You look at a city like Portland that has a similar situation and you say, why'd you take the money away if now you need to give it back and try to beef it up again?
Yeah, I think clearly in all of the calls to defund the police, they rush to defund without replacing it with anything. This idea that suddenly taking money away from the police and putting it into these programs, in many cases nebulously defined, that all of a sudden tomorrow, 24 hours later, we're going to get rid of all of the problems that we had a fully funded police force to begin with. That obviously doesn't work that way.
They are insane, and they do not know what they're doing. Their actions are getting people killed. It is insane to say that minorities lack the intelligence and the ability to get a photo ID for voting, or to say that signature verification shouldn't be necessary. Doesn't this show intent on their part? The radical left are insane and cannot be trusted. This type of reasoning is purely insane and disregards history. Hitler and Stalin gained power by corrupting the electoral process.
You have a situation where politicians don't dare cross the cartels or they'll be gunned down. News reporters don't dare write critical things because they'll be killed and they're not protected. And you wonder, from the outside perspective, who's more powerful, the government or these renegade mob-like organizations?
Well, they had one recent case where they captured the son of one of the major cartel leaders, and the cartel literally attacked the prison, defeated the army and the police, and liberated the son. I mean, that to me, that was the really final straw. We're now faced with, I think, almost like Lebanon, real danger of a government that's unable to control its own territory. And because it's our next door neighbor, and frankly, it's a big country, there are a lot of people in Mexico. So we have a huge interest, and much bigger than we do in Syria or a lot of the places we pay attention to. Mexico is a much more important part of our future than those countries are.
There are certain areas that are extremely dangerous. I remember going down there to cover the border in El Paso, and I asked the Border Patrol agents, what if I went over to Mexico right there? They said you wouldn't come back, so it's pretty scary.
It is insane to have open borders with a country that is run by the drug cartel. This could allow hundreds of thousands of people with low moral values to be organized to terrorize our nation. George Orwell said, "The people will believe what the media tells them they believe." Edward Bernays helped us understand this media control when he said, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country." The Russians learned that if you control the public media, you can get away with murder. The world was deeply offended at the evil inflicted on George Floyd, and rightly so. And yet the world has said virtually nothing about the deliberate starvation of 7 million Ukrainians by the Russians. Because of the global overlords and the power brokers that control the media, this message did not get out. The records show that many Ukrainians took their last breath, believing that the Americans would come to their rescue as they had done when Lenin did the same thing. When are we as Americans going to hold the media responsible?
Having killed a quarter of the nation's population, the Soviets staged one of the greatest cover-ups in history. The following year, the Soviet cover-up achieves its ultimate success, a seat in the League of Nations. Trade relations take precedence. The famine is regarded as a strictly internal Soviet affair. The Western governments make their peace with genocide.
In New England, teachers would repeatedly say the driving force of their life was to teach the students how to think. Throughout history, a good education has been a life-altering experience, particularly for wealthy people, taking them from a sheltered life and exposing them to a more informed way of thinking, enabling them to learn to crosstalk and grow to a stable maturity. Not learning the language of crosstalking during the adolescent years, the possibility remains that they might never grow up, as Hesiod suggests when speaking of the silver people who never grew up. The driving force of learning to reason and think changed in the 1960s and 70s when students began to be influenced into reasoning that this was oppressive and they shouldn't be burdened. As a result, we have a large population of people that are no longer challenged to think things through and re-examine the facts.
Experts. So the intellectual temptation is to say, look, we already know everything.
That's right.
If only we also had
the power.
All the power,
yes,
everything would be just fine.
Yes.
And what's wrong with that view? Why isn't that a sensible view?
One, they don't know everything. They don't know 1/10 of everything. In fact, I argue that they probably don't know 1% of the consequential knowledge in a society.
Consequential knowledge is a concept that runs through this book. Explain that concept.
Knowledge whose presence or absence has consequences, serious consequences. I mean, I was once in a plane that was coming down for a landing in the Ithaca airport, and suddenly the pilot gunned the motor and went up again because someone in the control tower had reminded him that he hadn't lowered his landing gear. So that was consequential knowledge, right? Yes. I was just delighted that that person had his eyes open and his mind on his work.
So the notion here is that the kind of knowledge, the kind of consequential knowledge required to prove effective in governing a nation such as the United States with the biggest economy in the world, 300 million people, you can put together quite a large group of professors, and they're still not going to possess the knowledge that would enable them to run General Motors, for example, or to run the nation's healthcare system.
The article is by Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan. You can Google it. It's IYI. It's intellectual yet idiot. It's the most useful single article I've ever read. Taleb's point is that at least 40% of the governing elites worldwide are people who are really good at taking tests and writing essays, which gets them into really elite colleges where they take classes from professors who are really good at taking tests and writing essays. And so when they take tests and write essays, they get really good grades. So the professor then places them with a judge or a newsroom or a bureaucracy so that they can continue to take tests and write essays. He said the only problem with these people is they don't know anything. And so they could write a brilliant essay on how to change a tire, but if you showed up and said, my car has a flat, they would not know how to change the tire. These are the people, this was the best explanation of what I've been dealing with over the last, it explains 80% of the State Department. These are very, very erudite people who are idiots. They're intellectuals, but they're idiots.
The shogun's iron hand extended to every detail of a peasant's life.
Farmers must work in the fields from dawn to dusk. Wives and daughters must make meals 3 times a day, put on red headbands, and take the meals to the fields. Once men are home after dusk, sisters-in-law and female cousins must put the chapped feet of the man on the stomach of his wife and massage them.
Some people say, well, taxes are regressive, but in this case, yes, they are. That's the good thing about them, because the problem is in people that don't have a lot of money. And so higher taxes should have a bigger impact on their behavior and how they deal with themselves. So I listen to people saying, oh, we don't want to tax the poor. Well, we want the poor to live longer so that they can get an education and enjoy life. And that's why you do want to do exactly what a lot of people say you don't want to do. The question is, do you want to pander to those people, or do you want to get them to live longer? And there's just no question. If you raise taxes on full sugary drinks, for example, they will drink less, and there's just no question that full sugar drinks are one of the major contributors to obesity, and obesity is one of the major contributors to heart disease and cancer and a variety of other things.
The environment is being used for a power struggle. The environment is being used for centralized government. The environment is being used to make a one world government. That we are facing a battle against those that want to destroy a great United States of America.
You know, when I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, you know, under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even, you know, regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal-powered plants, you know, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
Our country needs us, and we need people like George Soros.
An orderly decline of the dollar is actually desirable. A decline in the value of the dollar is necessary. China will emerge as the motor replacing the U.S. consumer time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order.
If the value of the dollar declines, our standard of living will plummet. Some Chinese factory workers work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They live in dormitory rooms with 6 other people. You do not want what George Soros wants for us. George Soros heavily funds politicians that align themselves with his plans. Open borders. It is time for Americans to throw the new left under the bus.
Well, for many years, leftist billionaire George Soros has used his wealth to remake our society, American society. His latest area of focus is criminal justice. From Texas to Philadelphia, the state of Virginia, Soros has reportedly spent millions of dollars backing candidates for district attorney, for prosecutor. Once elected, these candidates have ended cash bail, treated felonies like misdemeanors, and sometimes ignored some crimes entirely. In the city of Philadelphia, for example, Soros backed Larry Krasner, and the murder rate there is the highest it has been in a decade. Krasner's main priority, though, is to get even softer on crime. Bill McSwain is U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and he joins us tonight. Mr. McSwain, thanks very much for coming on. So it's remarkable in a democracy that one man can have the ability to remake our justice system, but it sounds to some extent that's what George Soros is doing. What are his priorities? What are his goals in doing this?
Well, first of all, I would say that I think in a lot of ways Philadelphia is the laboratory where this experiment in Soros-funded prosecutors is playing out. And now the returns are in, to a certain extent. Larry Krasner has been in office for about 1.5 years, funded by Mr. Soros. And we can look at the data and we can see what has happened to Philadelphia. And as you said, homicides have skyrocketed, shootings have skyrocketed, the worst kinds of violent crime have really gone up. And in addition to that, some of the low-level and the mid-level crimes have also gone up, but they aren't being reported. And the reason they're not being reported is because the DA has said he's not going to prosecute them. So you have statistically a bad situation that has developed in Philadelphia, but actually the reality on the ground is even worse than the statistics.
We have a democracy. We, the people, are in charge. We should demand that all state legislatures set up a referendum in which the citizens of that state can vote on each one of these issues. This should take place in weeks. Then the state legislatures will demand that their Washington representatives fulfill the will of the people. If these representatives do not fulfill the will of the people, the state will have the right to recall them for their failure of duty. This type of vote might happen twice a year for a while until we clean up the corruption in Washington. No more pork. Hopefully, history will read that the American people took charge and voted on voter identity, signature verification, border security, women athletic competition, and supporting law enforcement. Get more information at psnorac.com/insane/